Okay, great. Hello. Welcome to the JupyterLab weekly meeting for March 23rd. Today we have we have 18 people on the call now. Hopefully a few more will come. And we have an agenda in the chat. Please add your name and any subject you'd like to discuss to the bullet points on there. If you have something to discuss that's going to take longer than 5 minutes, please add it to the bottom section for additional discussions. And with that, let's get started. The first person on the agenda today is Frederic.
Hello, everybody. There has been a PR opened by new contributors for passing by the current working directory from the launcher to the terminal. So when you open the terminal from the launcher, instead of being at the I think it's the current working directory of the server, you will be on the folder of the launcher. That's me, not the one of the file browser. And the user asked if it was possible to bring it to 33x. So usually the answer is no, because it's changing the API. Like it will change the API of the terminal creation, just adding new arguments. So the question is like, is it acceptable for some exception, or should we start thinking of doing a 3.4? Yeah, that's the question I get for that one.
So they want to add new arguments to an already existing API.
Yeah, that's exactly what's.
Can they be optional? Because if they can be optional, then it's not breaking, and then.
Yeah, it's not breaking. It's just changing it, but it's not breaking. Yeah.
Oh, they just want it before 4.0.
Yeah, that's it.
Wow.
Strictly speaking, even if it's not backward incompatible, if you're adding to the API, it seems like Semver philosophically would say make it 3.4, not 3.3.x.
Yeah,
I agree.
And that's no more difficult to publish than 3.3.x would be anyway, I imagine. So if I'm assuming you've reviewed this PR, if you're happy with the PR, I would propose that we target a 3.4 branch. There might be other things that are additive that we want to put in there anyway.
Yeah,
Does anyone have any other ideas?
I know my add button for the new launcher that's still in review is a good one to go in there, that I was like, oh, I wish this was in before 4.0.
Yeah, and I'm seeing Jason has written also like the cell toolbar could be a good candidate.
We got a question, what's blocking 4.0? If I remember correctly, it's notebook 7, isn't it? Like in the broad strokes. Like
no, I think we also need the final APIs that we're going to commit to for RTC. And
yeah, there is
we are looking
three things.
Yeah, probably Code Mirror 6. That's right.
And there are gonna be change in the API I'm working on for performance rendering of the notebook that will break some API.
And you know what, I should add myself onto the agenda. I want to talk about notifications, because that's an API that I think should go into 4.0 and is loosely coupled with RTC, in that when you have lots of people on an app, you probably want to see notifications. So there's enough blocking 4.0 that we can probably do a 3.4 because there are features ready to roll right now.
Okay, great. So I'll create the branch.
Is it possible to make it backward compatible then, this function with the default parameter, maybe?
I mean, it's fully backward compatible. The option, everything is, it's possible to just pass in undefined. It's more like in the spirit of Semver, like, is it better to, and also as there are more features, I think it's fine to probably start to 3.4, like, and Mike is supporting a 3.4 too in the chat, so let's go for 3.4. Okay, thanks. And the other point, on Friday at the Jupyter governance call, We discussed the possibility to submit a letter of intent for CZI grant in light of the coming Notebook 7. The content of that grant will be addressing documentation and maintenance, mainly related to migration of extension. So I have opened, and it's the link in the note, I have opened a pull request with the draft of the letter of intent on the Team Compass. So feel free to look at that and comment. The goal is really to try to have the content of that letter of intent to align as much as possible to what the community wants with high priority for the Notebook 7 migration. And of course, it will be mainly related to JupyterLab 7, to JupyterLab 4 as the code base is the same. That's why I bring it here too. And that's it for me.
Cool, thank you.
And I think Isabella is not there, but it's mainly announcement. If you want, I can go ahead.
Yeah, go for it.
So there's the accessibility meeting 15 minutes after this one for people that are interested in it. It's really a great subject. And there is also another call coming, but that will be next Tuesday. Yeah, next Tuesday it will be the Jupyter community call. So don't forget to add it to your calendar. That's usually a good call for saying nice demo.
Cool. Thank you, Frederic, for channeling Isabella. Jason W., you're up next.
Okay, I think I'm the only Jason on the call this week because Mr. Grout is currently moving house. So the cell toolbar, that pull request has been in work in progress for a long time, but last week I removed the whip tag. So I'm now considering it a candidate to merge into the 4.x series. I know I've got some feedback, but I figured I'd use this time to ping the group for some more. I was also talking with folks on my team. There are folks within my organization that are trying to upgrade our commercial offerings from JupyterLab 1 to 3. And whenever I tell them, oh, by the way, we're working on 4.x, they kind of react like I just kicked their dog. And so I'm wondering whether the cell toolbar should get backported. That is going to be a non-trivial amount of effort. This is a very large feature. I don't think it specifically looks at anything under JupyterLab 4, but I think backporting it is probably going to be some substantial amount of work.
So what is the question you're trying to resolve?
Should we backport it? Should we consider the cell toolbar a candidate to backport to the 3.3.x or 3.4.x series, or is this something we should keep for a major version upgrade?
Well, you built it. Do you want to backport it?
I'll do it if there's a demand to do it. This is something that I can probably prioritize with my team. I'm open to doing it. I just wanted to kind of take the pulse of the organization to see if this is something that we should do, or if there's any objection to it. If there's no objection and there's general favor for doing it, then I can proceed with it. I'd probably own it anyway.
Okay, I mean, we can ask people to do a thumbs up, or does this thing support thumbs down?
I think there is a thumbs down, isn't there?
Oh yeah, you
no,
have to search. You have to search for the emojis, just not by default. But anyway,
there's an X thing as well. It says no.
I kind of don't want to put a thumb on the scale and say what I think before asking people to vote, but I do have a thought, and that is you choosing how to spend the time that you have working on stuff probably is more important than most of the other considerations, because this feature is coming out anyway, so it's sort of low stakes, and we're talking a matter of a few months. But yeah, I don't know, people, if you go to the reactions and you do the ... you can search for thumbs up and thumbs down, so they're both there. How about we
You should also see
vote?
a green yes and a red no reaction under that menu as well.
Oh yeah, or that.
Okay, so I'm seeing mostly yeses, one no so far.
Jason, just to mention, I don't think it will be so complex to backport.
Okay. I mean,
I just,
I'm only going by that because it's been fairly complex to add it in the first place.
okay, so it looks like it's overwhelmingly people saying yes. I'm the only one who said no. And I said no because I think carrots are nice, give people incentives to upgrade. But
Oh, for sure. I mean, this is something that like we are trying to deal with within our own organization, is like getting people to upgrade, because we occasionally get complaints that like XYZ feature doesn't work in JupyterLab 1, and our reaction is invariably, well, you should upgrade then. And that touches off some awkward conversations. I see Mike has a hand up though.
What are you thinking, Mike?
I'm very happy for that to be backported to 3.4. The only concern would be, can we make sure that it's as easy to disable as possible, possibly without going to the terminal and disabling the extension, and that it does not overlay the contents of the cell on the smaller screens. So these are two small unresolved issues which were postponed, and it would have been fine to postpone them with the original plan of working on that in the 4.0 timeline, which is possibly longer. But if we are backporting, I think we should prioritize those two improvements.
Yeah, I also feel like, to Mike's point, like waiting to backport until we've kind of iterated a little bit, because as we ship this in 4.0, people are going to start using it in the real world and get, we'll probably get some bugs and enhancement requests before we start backporting it. So otherwise, if we backport it, we're gonna have to port all the fixes as well. So yeah, and I've already opened an issue for some of the like cell toolbar v2 feature requests, such as the ability to like collapse and expand the cell toolbar. Right now, it either appears or it doesn't, which folks are not universally in love with. I respect that. Okay. Well, I'll continue to pursue this within my own team. I appreciate the team's time. I did want to talk about a couple of other issues, though. One is, and I think Brian is on the call here. We've had a request, again, coming from internal to my company, is about customizing the can start kernel option in the notebook extension. Currently, that's hard-coded to true, and we want the ability to turn that off. I opened an issue and I have a pull request about it. I also had a thing in JupyterLab server that was approved overnight to add this in. And I just wanted to make the broader team aware of that. I don't know if there's any like questions or if people are curious about that.
I only have one question, Jason. Could you give the reason why to set it as a server-side settings and not a front-end one?
That's a good question. I know Brian is on the call. I haven't heard anything from him yet. The first whack I'd made at it was actually to do it on the front end, but it was requested to put it on the back end and put it in page config instead. So I'm open to doing it in either way. I see Brian is just unmuting.
Yeah, hi everyone. Right now, our use case for this is more at the deployment level. So an entire deployment of JupyterLab, the admin would want to set this, and it would be done in coordination with other things like swapping out kernel managers or terminal managers. And so for that use case, I was thinking more of a command line config file setting. We're open though, if it does make sense to be in the JupyterLab settings, that's also a possibility. And we're aware that the admin can set those up as well. So wanted input on this point for folks.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, I don't have any strong opinion on the best position. It was just like, I was surprised, as usually we don't put much settings on the server side, and it was just to try to get the rationale behind it. So yeah, if it makes more sense because it's related to some deployment and nobody objects that it should be front end too, then I'm fine with what was proposed, definitely.
Yeah, I think
would
that
love
there's
to
going to
get,
be. Go ahead, Brian.
I would love to get Jason Grout's input on this. I know he spent a lot of time on the kernel logic, so I don't think he's here today.
No, he's not on the call today. I think this is going to be a fairly lightly used option generally. Okay, so I'll continue work on that. There's one other item that I wanted to talk about that is we triaged last week. I wanted to share my screen real quick. I hope everyone can see it, which is an enhancement request that came in to make paths in the file browser editable. So right now you can only navigate around using the UI controls, but Matthias Hauser suggested navigating around using something similar to file browsers on Linux, UIs, Windows, Mac, where you can kind of jump to a path. And I wanted to jump down. Josh Gaydon suggested doing this instead of using the standard JupyterLab dialog, instead putting in this kind of inline text box to be able to navigate by clicking or double clicking on the breadcrumbs to make this editable, type something in, hit enter, and then that changes the directory. And he had some questions about that. What do folks think about this approach, about modifying the file browser to have this kind of jump functionality?
I think it'd be a little weird that you could edit the path, but like you can't go above the launch directory, right? That's kind of like a problem with Jupyter.
Yeah, if you're trying to copy paste something from like any other context in your file system, it's not going to work.
Yeah, so is the proposal to have it be a text box the whole time, or a text box after you click on the breadcrumbs?
It looks like what Josh is requesting is that it normally looks the same, and then if you double click, you get this text box that replaces it, and then when you hit enter, it reverts to this, assuming you've entered something valid. Of course, if you enter something that's invalid, you'd get either some kind of error or we'd ignore it. But the idea is that if you don't click on anything, it would look like it does today.
Okay.
So and I believe we have single click handlers on the breadcrumbs. So this would require us to like implement a double click handler.
Well, okay, there's a few things. I think this definitely needs some accessibility thought. Mike shares a really good link about breadcrumbs. Nick points out what I was thinking too about autocomplete is something you'd really want in a feature like this.
Yep.
I think a jump to directory that is accessible by mouse and accessible by keyboard shortcut and accessible by file menu and accessible by command palette is probably an attractive thing to offer. The question of how that manifests in the file browser UI itself is less obvious to me. There's a lot you give up by changing users' expectations of what those breadcrumbs mean, and double click itself is a specific, like hard to discover thing in a web UI, although we're trying really hard. We have other double clicks in the system. What do other people think about this?
Yeah,
I think for now.
Go ahead, Brian. Go ahead.
It sounds like the UX and accessibility ambiguity at this point is significant enough that we would probably need someone to really dive into it, explore those dimensions before we could really commit to a particular solution to this. I think it's an interesting question. I just don't, I can't see through all the ambiguity to a yes or no yet.
It's very much a power user type feature, in my opinion. Like on the Mac, you can jump inside a file picker, but you have to hit Command-Shift-G, at least in English language versions of Mac OS, which is not exactly something like someone showed me that, must have been 10 years ago, and I've memorized it, but there's nothing that kind of cues you to do that. On Windows, you can like click in the address bar, which sort of works like a web browser circa 20 years ago. Again, not something that like you strictly need. It's just something that you would learn as you go. And so I think if we implemented this, it would also be something that you would either have to know or you would just be blissfully ignorant of.
I got Nemo in Debian, and there is a button for switching the type of edition you want. I'm not a big fan of it, but you get this button, and so you switch from breadcrumb to edition.
Okay.
So the Command-Shift-G thing that you bring up, that's a modal. That doesn't modify the UI of the Finder window you're in.
Yeah.
One way to do this, I don't remember if both Sublime Text and VS Code do it, but at least one of them does this, and I've become quite used to it. The same keyboard shortcut that brings up the command palette, if you begin typing a path, it'll navigate to a path. So the command palette will also be a path navigator modal. So if the proposal you showed us is specifically about the file browser, that's one thing. If it's just about a quick navigation, that's a different thing, and they might have different answers.
Yeah, nobody's really asking for like, I understand, I know exactly, I use VS Code all the time. I have little experience with Sublime Text, but the even Chrome's dev tools and Firefox's dev tools support this kind of jump to file keyboard accelerator. To be honest, I'm surprised no one's asked for that yet, at least not in this particular issue, the ability to like jump from file to file. But I think this is a little different because this is, they want to like jump from directory to directory. But we may have to like negotiate this. All right, well, I'm going to add some comments to that particular item 12221. I added it to the notes, so if other folks want to talk about it, I decided to bring it up just because the person who responded to it came up with some really interesting concepts that I figured the team would have some opinions about, and we could talk about that for hours, but I want to cede my time to other folks, notably
Cool.
Piyush, who is next on the agenda.
Great, thanks, Jason. Piyush, you're up.
Hey guys, so I have updated the repo for the data registry. So I moved the updates I had to the original Data Explorer repository, and I reorganized the code, so it's just a pre-built extension now, and there's a binder link in the PR as well if somebody wants to try. I have copied Vidar and Max on that, but if anyone else is interested, please feel free to add some feedback here. That's all.
Cool, thank you. Did you get any feedback or participation yet? I know you've people.
I just posted it.
Oh, okay.
Last night, yeah. So I'm still.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, Mehmet, you're up next.
Hi everyone. I just have a quick update on JupyterLab desktop. I released the version 332-1, and this upgrades the bundled JupyterLab version to 332. And this version also comes with some fixes to Conda environment activation problems. That's all I have.
Does the desktop app give you the ability to, using just that UI, update yourself the way other desktop apps do? Is that a thing that you support in it?
Are you talking about automatic updates, like restart?
Not even automatic, but like you launch it and it tells you there's an update available and allows you to click update or something like that.
Yeah. Currently, we are providing notification if there's an update available, and the user still has to go to GitHub releases page and download it from there. But I'm working on some changes to allow us to do automatic updates. And once that is done, what will happen is the update will be downloaded in the background, and you will need to click a button to like restart to activate. You can see this on VS Code, for example. So that's
amazing.
something, a planned change, yeah.
Nice, that's awesome. Cool. It looks like I'm next, and I've just written a single word. That's not really helpful. Let me post the link to the repo that I'm discussing. So last summer, one of the teams at Cal Poly who worked on different JupyterLab extensions, they did an extension for notifications inside JupyterLab. And Andrew, who came to this call a couple of weeks ago, he's still working on it. And this touches a lot of parts of our stack. There is a server extension and there's a front-end extension for JupyterLab to display notifications. And some pieces of this functionality belong in different packages if they're ever to be in core. So for example, an event bus, very much like this one, if not identical, maybe it would be slightly different because there's already prior art in a package that was originally thought of as a telemetry package, but might actually be more fit for purpose as a general purpose event bus exists. And so pieces of this probably should be in Jupyter Server, and definitely some aspect of a notifications API belongs in JupyterLab. So I just wanted to reintroduce folks to this set of functionality in its current state, and to say that this is a piece that I'd like to work on this year. And I think it's probably, like, it's not a hard requirement of shipping an app with real-time collaboration, but it seems like pretty useful for any app that has lots of people doing stuff to have a coherent notification strategy instead of each individual plugin deciding, how am I going to tell you I updated, that kind of thing. I guess I want to take the temperature of the room. I asked in the Jupyter server call last week, and they were on board with having server endpoints for publishing events, for deleting events, and a WebSocket for publishing notifications. But even if that exists, we could not ship a JavaScript API inside JupyterLab with that. That could be a thing that gets added later. But I wanted to ask if people think this is a worthwhile thing to bring into core for JupyterLab 4. If the answer is yes, I'm happy to work on it. If the answer is no, I'll look for something else. Yes, Nick, that is exactly what I was thinking. So Nick points out that we were talking about how in Notebook version 7, we actually have true browser tabs. And if you modify the settings in the settings editor and you have 4 tabs open with 4 different notebooks, suppose, I don't know, you changed your theme or you changed the max number of output lines or whatever, you would have to go individually refresh those pages for that to work. But if you have an event bus and they're all subscribed to a WebSocket, they would all receive that and maybe choose to update themselves. But it also raises the question of, if I have 4 notebooks open and the tree page open, do I want 5 different WebSocket connections? I don't know the answer to that. We can solve that later. Does anyone have an objection to this going in core? Is probably a better way of asking, because I got some positive signals there. Is there anyone who thinks this is like not a thing we should have in JupyterLab 4? Cool. Thanks. That's it for my update. Mike, you're up next.
So regarding the discussion about editable paths in the file browser, I noted that we have status needs discussion label, but we do not have status needs design, even though we have status design complete. And I was wondering whether that would enhance our triage process a little bit if we had such a label. Just request for comments. And the other thing is that I opened an issue to discuss how we could bring Markdown into the new settings editor user interface, and there are 3 options listed. And maybe you have other ideas. It was open for, I think, 2 weeks now, and I would appreciate some feedback on that, and maybe would like to work on that.
I can take a look at that. I didn't see that, but
I'm glad you said so, Martha, because I was about to say we should ask Martha.
yeah. Yeah, I just did not catch that.
Thanks.
Okay, cool. So we have one additional discussion point from Frederic about web components in Jupyter, and along with a demo. Ordinarily, we haven't figured out whether we're recording these or not, but this seems kind of cool. It's going to have a demo. So Frederic, unless you object, I propose we keep recording the call for your demo.
Yeah, sure. Especially because I think Jason Groth was interested by the subject and he's not here today, so he can watch later.
Cool. One thing though, before we launch into it, if there's anyone who wanted to raise something in the agenda and didn't, now's a good time, because if not, we're done with the agenda. We're going to do additional discussions. Okay, Frederic, it's all you.
So let me share my screen, pick up the right one, this one. So I've presented in the past already that I've been working on a toolkit of components based on a standard, that's web component or custom component. So the main difference compared to React, it's an official standard, and what happens is you are creating also component like React, Vue, and stuff like that, but it gets this. Can you see it? Is it big enough? I don't know if zooming will work here. Okay, seems it works. Or let me close those things up. So what happened is, like, for the button, you have your own tags. So instead of having the standard button, you say, okay, I define the custom button. Everything is prefixed in this toolkit by GP for Jupyter. And those components are using what's called shadow DOM. So the real description of every component is actually a subtree of elements. So for example, if I take the search is, there is a label within the search, and then there is the multiple div that wraps the input. The input is there, and there is also a clear button that's in here. So everything is in a shadow DOM, so that's the structure. And because it's using shadow DOM, also the style are local. And that's a feature of shadow DOM. So styling doesn't come from the top page, it's just locally specified. The only thing that can go from styling point of view from the outside world inside the shadow DOM are CSS properties, and that's cool because that's what we are using for theming, so that helps. So that's the structure of it. And on the JavaScript, so to bring what's called behaviors on a component, you will define a class that defines the behavior of this. So that's the technology, let's say, behind it. One of the limitation that is known, or risk, it's you cannot register multiple times the same new tags because the browser won't like it. So the work I have done lately was to try different version of my toolkit to see what's happening when I'm doing that. And to do that, what I did with some colleagues is that we have worked on creating some extension. So for instance, here we have created an extension that's a bit like in VS Code is search through the tree of files and looking for matches. So that extension is using those web components, but they are using a different version of the library, and that can be seen easily if you look at the panel here. So I changed the panel. This is the latest version. The accursion panel is using like the arrow to match what we are using in Jupyter most of the time. And if you look here, we can see that's using a previous version because I was not changing the default button that were like this plus and minus thing. So the good news is that it's not crashing. Everything works. And the only thing is that if you have multiple extension that brings their own version, you don't know at the end which version is gonna be used. So that's the conclusion of that. As discussed previously, if this made it to core, so if JupyterLab itself is serving this library, the advantage is that we can specify to Webpack that we want to use only one version in the federation, and so we will ensure that we have a strict control of it, a bit like what we are doing for React, for example, or CodeMirror. Then the other point was how to deal with reaction, like how to deal with the updates. So because it's not React thing, it's not Lumino things, it's yet another thing. We need to be honest about it. So the idea was to test some custom element and to see how we can use both mechanisms, so Lumino signals and what they are using in the library that I'm using here, so the FAST library from Microsoft. So in the FAST library of Microsoft, they've defined what they call observable. What's an observable? So this is the code I'm showing for. So what I'm showing here in the demo is just a button and a span that displays the level of a counter, and every time you click, it will increase the counter by 1. So that's quite easy. And so you can either do an observable model using an observable from FAST. So that means it's you use a decorator and you say, okay, your attribute is observable. And by doing that, every time you use it within the template, what's happening is behind the scene, the library, it will keep reference and it will say, okay, this is an observable. And so if the observable in the HTML template is changed, then it knows that this part of the templates need to be updated. That's how FAST is working. So that's kind of magic because the only thing you need to do is to decorate your attribute, and you get, it's like for taking a parallel with Lumino, it's like you define for Lumino, you would define an attribute and then define a signal that say, okay, this attribute is changing. And here you basically have it for free. You just do these decorators and then you can you can add listener for this variable change in your code. So that's what I have done here. I have done one model that's using fast observable, and I have done another another model that's using the inspiration of this virtual DOM model that you are using in Jupyter Core. So basically, when you inherit from this model, you get for free signals that state change. And so you can link a view. And so every time you do a change in that model, you can trigger that signal and that should update the view. So that's the other implementation I have done, just to see if we can do both. And okay, I successfully did both. So that's cool because that means we could also introduce those components and link them to some part of the code that's using signal. It's possible. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's possible. So, so basically, what needs to be done is you need at some points to do explicitly what this decorator is doing implicitly. So when you are doing this decoration of attribute, what's behind the scene is the equivalent of saying, okay, when you get the model, you are telling the fast system that you are tracking the modification of a certain properties. So by adding this line, and when you are setting the model, you need to call a notification saying, okay, you are gonna notify that that specific property has changed. And that's how we can hook the behavior, like the reaction of luminous signal change to a fast change. And so the template is updated, the HTML template is updated. So that's pretty much it for the demo. As you can see, the syntax looks close enough to what you would expect, like using Vue or React. So you directly put your HTML. When you want to add a listener, you have to use the hat and then the name of the event you are listening, and then you press the callback. There are specific things if you, for example, want to display a list of elements in an array, but yeah, that's specific to the technology, but everything is quite well organized. There are also something a bit similar to React, the capability of saying I render this part only when the condition is true. So that's also available in that technology. And one thing also, it's really easy to hook that up in a widget because as those elements are HTML elements, if I open the index file where I'm instantiating things, oops, that's here. So what we are just doing, saying is like we are creating the view, and the view we directly say that's a widget, and the node is that view because it's directly an HTML element. So we can directly create a widget like this. So that's really easy to place it inside the widget for integration in JupyterLab.
Is fast element kind of a polyfill that will go away one day, or is it a new dependency that will be enduring if we switch to using this UI toolkit to build stuff?
It will endure. In this, the trouble is what the standard is agreed upon is this way of registering new tags as an HTML element, but you don't get the goodies like this syntax to easily add a listener to event and stuff like that. If you want to do that, you can with like the standard, but you need to go back to the way, the vanilla GS way, like saying, okay, I take this element and then I add a listener too. So you are, the main thing if we think we will drop it later is that you will be dropping those helpers. Is, for example, the reason also, so of course the Microsoft has a version, Google has another one that's called Lit, and Lit has the same thing. It's bringing those HTML templating things that has lots of goodies to help the user getting more in less characters in the JavaScript side.
And can you explain a little bit what the full landscape looks like between some Lumino widgets that are pure HTML and JavaScript Lumino widgets, some that are React, and some that are fast elements? Like, what is a good state of the code base in terms of UI, say, I don't know, 2 or 3 years from now?
So my opinion is the widgets are too complex to manipulate compared to like React element or stuff like that. I think the life cycle of them is tough, and also it's very hard to integrate them inside other technology, and that web component standard, that's one of the advantages. For free, you can integrate them in Vue and Svelte or whatever you want. The only trouble for now is React actually is not supporting it natively. They introduced it as an experimental support, but finally they decided to drop it off of the V19. It should be V18 that's coming, and it should be in V19. Yeah, Mike, it's you can wrap them. I didn't spoke about it, but you can wrap them in inside React component. So if I'm showing back the demo, so on the difference between the two panels, you think it looks the same. Actually, it should look the same because that's the difference. Here on the top is directly web component, and on the bottom, those are the same component but wrapped inside React element. And so basically for the browser, those are the same, but you use what you prefer as a technology. There are some bugs, like the more obvious one is the slider, the position of the label. And yeah, so I think that's why I really like this technology. It's because it's a standard. You can use the same thing and apply the framework you prefer. And so for the long term, I think it's the best. And also because they come with encapsulated styling. I think I know I've seen some question on the chat. Some people say, that means you need to yet learn another thing. But I think you could reduce the amount of things you need to learn, in the sense that the styling comes for free. Like if you reuse that toolkit, the theming will be for free. You don't need to figure out what are the CSS variable for most of the style. It will be positioning and layout. So that's make things easier. Like for the extension, for example, we have been working on the quantity of code you write within the extension is a bit less. So that's for sure. And after, it's up to you. Like, it's what's nice also with those components. You can just keep using them at the leaf level, as we have been doing with React, for instance, and use whatever you want as a upper technology. But if we are gonna go for it, I think in core, I think it will make sense to try to get rid as much as possible of other framework like React, and probably on the long term try to reduce the size of Lumino widget.
Any other comments? I have a question. So would you want to bring in, like, how would you socialize this? Would you go into some components that exist already inside JupyterLab and replace them with fast elements? Or what are you talking about, an extension UI toolkit? Like which user interfaces should be built with this toolkit?
So my plan in midterm, that means a couple of months, would be to open a PR that's replacing or multiple PRs that start replacing some of the UI that's existing by just the same from the toolkit. One of the reasons behind is they come with accessibility behavior right in, and also they will allow a more consistent look and feel throughout the core application, especially because if people wants to change, that's something that for now it's complex. Like if you think a button, the change in the color when you are doing hover or focus on a button is not good enough. If you want to improve that, you will only need to change that in the toolkit, and you will get it for free on every buttons inside JupyterLab. So that's another advantage of promoting it inside core, and it will be also propagating to the extension if extension author decide to go that way too. But I don't want extension authors to be forced to do that. But I know that as an author myself, in the future, the goal is to use it because it will make designing and creating those extensions faster.
I mean, I think rather than going after everything across the whole UI, concentrating on going after the settings editor to where we had a React JSON schema form that was pluggable, that was overridable, but was driven by an alternate UI toolkit. Because I think when you can model the data that you want and then give little UI hints, that's where the performance, not the performance, that's where the productivity gains are extremely strong.
That's my first target. I totally agree.
That is, okay. Yeah, okay. So those are already off in some other crazy town, doing some other thing that has nothing to do with anything else that we have. They're just, React DOM baseline stuff. So that's great. That's not gonna, those were a new thing that was added because they provided value at this top level thing. So if you offered it to an extension author, here's a form, give me a JSON schema, maybe mark it up a little bit, and now you get an observable model off the end of it. That's getting the job done, for sure. So yeah, that's good, Carrot. I mean, I echo.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, I also think that, especially because it's using a lot of component widget within it.
Okay, folks, I'm going to stop the recording. We can continue talking about this, but is there any last thing you want in the recording, just so there's a couple minutes in case somebody wanted to say something?
Just taking the hat of Isabella again, just so that in 15 minutes, there's going to be the accessibility meeting.
Cool, great.